The lights in the Geneva Hall glowed soft and sterile, but the air was tense. Delegates from over 60 countries had gathered for the International Policy Forum on Global Equity. Cameras rolled, phones streamed, and seated near the center stage was President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, silent, observant, unreadable. Karoline Leavitt, a rising American political star in her early 30s, stood at the podium. Dressed in sharp white, voice steady, her tone shifted as she spoke of Africa. She chuckled, then she smirked. And yet we pour billions into countries like Burkina Faso, hoping they one day matter economically or diplomatically. Laughter echoed, mostly polite. A few chuckled nervously, but many froze. A hush followed and eyes turned. Traoré hadn't moved, he hadn't blinked, he simply stared, and the silence around him grew louder than her words. One aide whispered, "He's in the room." Karoline paled slightly but recovered with a joke. Didn't mean offense, just facts, right? But something was broken. Not in Traoré, in the air. Something sacred had been cracked, and the world didn't know it yet, but they were seconds away from history. Traoré remained still, then he rose, slowly. No rush, no anger, just gravity. He stepped forward, not toward the stage, but to a mic placed discreetly in the center aisle for delegates. A few phones lifted. The room, once filled with diplomatic noise, fell into a vacuum. Karoline's fingers fidgeted under the podium. Traoré's voice was soft, but thunderous. "Mocking the struggles of others does not make you powerful," he said, eyes locked on her. "It reveals how little you understand your own." The translator barely kept pace. Gasps. One journalist near the front mouthed, "Oh my God." Traoré continued, weaving a quiet storm. He spoke of Burkina Faso's past, colonization, poverty, resistance, but also its rise, how farmers had built grain cooperatives, how youth organized literacy brigades, how women led land reclamation projects in the north. "We have lost too much," he said, "to let dignity be another casualty." Karoline swallowed. Her next line vanished from her mind, completely. Outside the building, protests had already begun. Not against Traoré, but because of him. Something was happening. It wasn't political. It was human, and the internet was about to feel it. The live stream was crisp. Millions watched. But what the cameras didn't catch, not clearly, was Karoline's eyes. They weren't angry. They were wet. She blinked fast, trying to stay composed. But Traoré wasn't done. He took a breath that seemed to pull silence from the corners of the room. Then he said, "We may not have your wealth, but we have something you've lost. Dignity without fear." The hall froze. One woman from Sweden dropped her pen. A South African delegate bowed his head, tears forming. Reporters stared at each other, unsure what to write. For once, there were no politics, just truth, so raw, so unclothed, it burned. A child watching at home in Ouagadougou whispered to her mother, "He speaks for us." In America, the internet split open, some furious, others shaken. Karoline stepped back from the mic. She couldn't respond. She wasn't silenced by shame. She was moved, but didn't know how to show it. As Traoré walked back to his seat, applause began. One clap, then two, then thunder. He didn't look around. He didn't smile. He simply sat. And history sat with him. As Traoré sat back down, his mind drifted. Not to the cameras, not to the applause, but to a village. A dusty road in Djibo. A school with no roof. A chalkboard made of a broken door. He remembered standing there, 22 years old, still in uniform, watching children trace numbers on the dirt with sticks. A girl had walked up, handed him a torn book, and said in broken French, "Can you fix this?" He couldn't, not then. But it was that moment that changed him. He joined others who believed in quiet revolution. They rebuilt wells, taught literacy by night, stood guard in towns abandoned by aid. That's what they never saw, not in the reports, not in the aid budgets. Burkina Faso wasn't begging, they were building. And in Geneva, that same man, the one who had once stood by a broken chalkboard, had just stood up again, this time with the world watching. Karoline didn't know that. She saw a president. She didn't see the soldier who had once walked for 2 hours to deliver bread to a famine-struck school. But now, the world would, and something was beginning to stir. Backstage, Karoline sat alone. She wasn't angry. She was confused. How had a country she barely studied shaken her this deeply? She had grown up in Boston, Ivy League, internships, political dinners. Africa was a policy, a bullet point. Burkina Faso, a statistic. But that man, he didn't speak like a president. He spoke like someone who'd bled for his people, and it undid her. Her hands shook as she checked her phone. Twitter was already a storm. Videos of Traoré's speech had hit 4 million views in under 2 hours. Hashtags like "No Dignity Without Fear" trended globally. One tweet read, "He didn't shame her, he educated the world." Another, "Traoré just did what 10 diplomats couldn't do in a decade. He made us feel." She turned off her phone. Her eyes blurred, then came a knock. One of her aides entered. "They want you back on stage in 20 minutes. Karoline looked up, broken. "No," she whispered, "I can't face that man again, not yet." Because deep down, for the first time in her career, she realized something painful. She had spoken from a place of power. He had spoken from a place of truth. Far away from Geneva, across oceans and deserts, a small village in northern Burkina Faso gathered under the glow of one solar-powered TV. Goats bleated in the distance. Wind carried sand through the trees. Children sat barefoot, cross-legged. Elders leaned in. The moment came. Traoré's voice filled the night air. When he said, "We have something you've lost, dignity without fear." An old woman pressed her hands together and wept. She had known him. She had known the boy who gave her medicine when no one else came. The one who lifted his father's broken body after a militia attack and still went back to rebuild the fence the next morning. Now the world knew him too. The children didn't blink. One boy whispered, "That's our president?" His older brother smiled. "No," he said. "That's our protector." And for the first time in months, there was laughter in the village. Not because of aid, not because of food, but because they felt seen. And that night, in dozens of villages across Burkina Faso, people slept with a new kind of pride. The kind that didn't come from applause, the kind that came from being defended. Karoline sat in her hotel suite, lights dim, the echo of Geneva still ringing in her ears. Her aide handed her a folder, reports for the next day's roundtable. But buried inside was something else, a letter, typed, translated, and dated only 4 months ago. From the children of Ouahigouya Primary School to President Traoré, Karoline almost skipped it. But something about the handwriting of the scanned original stopped her. She read, "We don't have enough books, but you gave us hope. We don't have light at night, but we remember your words. You told us we are the future. We believe you." It was signed by over 30 children. She felt something tighten in her chest. A policy figure? No. This man was loved by people who had nothing and still gave thanks. She turned to her aide. "Where did you find this?" The aide paused. "It was left on your desk by someone from the Burkina Faso delegation." Karoline couldn't speak. For the first time in her life, she wasn't preparing a speech. She was preparing to listen. And it scared her how much she had missed. Not in politics, but in humanity. Traoré sat by the window of his hotel room. Geneva's lights flickered outside, but his thoughts were miles away. He held a small frayed notebook. It was his brother's, Abdoulaye, killed by raiders when they were just boys. Abdoulaye had always wanted to be a teacher, wrote every dream down. Traoré kept the notebook. Everywhere he went, he flipped to the last page. "If I die, let them remember that I believed in this land." His hands trembled. Even presidents cry, but not always for cameras. He remembered the promise he had whispered to his brother's grave, "I will not kneel before men who call us nothing." Tonight, He had kept that promise. But it cost him something too. The world only saw the strength, not the pain, not the ache of leading a nation that had buried so many heroes unknown to headlines. A tear rolled down his cheek. His guard knocked softly. "Sir, your 9 a.m. address." He didn't answer. He just stared out the window, not in silence, in grief. Because long before he was president, he was a brother. And that wound never healed. In a worn-out hut in Gawa, Mama Fata adjusted the radio knob. She had lost her husband in a border ambush, 2 sons to militia crossfire, all buried without coffins, all dreams buried with them. But tonight she sat by the radio, hands shaking, heart steady. The broadcast played Ibrahim Traoré's speech again. When he said, "Dignity without fear," she pressed the radio to her chest and sobbed. "He remembers," she whispered. "He sees us." Her neighbor, blind from a landmine explosion, shuffled in quietly and sat beside her. Together they listened, not as victims, but as witnesses to something sacred. Mama Fata had once sold vegetables in the same market where Traoré's mother worked. She remembered him, the boy who helped his mother carry firewood and always shared his mango. Now he was giving her something no one had in years. Worth, not money, not charity, just the feeling that her tears mattered. Outside, goats cried and wind howled, but she remained still, clutching the radio, not because it was news, but because it was proof. They hadn't been forgotten, not by the world, not by their own. And that was enough to keep breathing one more day. The sun rose in Ouagadougou. The children gathered early, not to learn math, not to practice reading, but to watch again. Their teacher rolled in a small TV on a wooden cart. The school had one working solar panel. It powered this moment. President Traoré's speech played once more. The kids didn't blink. They had memorized his words. But today was different. One girl raised her hand. "Teacher, does America think we are weak?" The teacher paused. Her voice trembled. "Some people may think that, but not all." Another child asked, "Why did he say dignity without fear?" The teacher knelt beside him, eyes glassy. "Because even when your shoes are broken and your walls have holes, if your heart is strong and your spirit kind, you are not poor, you are powerful." The children nodded. They understood more than most adults did, because they knew what it meant to go to school hungry and still sing the anthem with pride. That afternoon, every child wrote a letter to the president, some in French, some in broken grammar, but all from the heart. And one read, "You did not fight with anger. You fought with our pain, and we felt it." The marble floors of Geneva's UN compound reflected everything except regret. Karoline walked slowly, heels clicking softly, past a line of African delegates gathered for an evening discussion. None greeted her, not from spite, but from silence, the kind that speaks volumes. She reached a quiet corner, sat on a bench and pulled out her tablet. She watched the clip of Traoré again, for the 6th time. His voice wasn't loud, it carried. She paused the video and stared at the freeze frame, his eyes, steady, heavy with history. She whispered, "How did I get this so wrong?" But the truth stung sharper than that. She hadn't just insulted a nation. She had stepped on stories, lives. She'd mistaken diplomacy for dominance, and now she was exposed, not by anger, but by a man who stood with more calm than any general, more strength than any headline. In the distance, someone began to play a kora, soft, aching notes. She wiped a tear and stood, not out of shame, but because she finally understood, you cannot represent a people you do not know. And tomorrow she would ask for a meeting with Traoré, not to respond, but to listen. In a quiet clearing behind his childhood village, Traoré stood alone. No guards, no reporters, just wind. He bent down and placed a white stone at the foot of a small, unmarked grave. No name, no date, just memory. This was where the old man who raised him was buried, not by blood, but by love. Papa Musa had taken him in when his father died, taught him to read using torn newspapers, gave him his first pair of boots. told him, "If your hands can carry water, your words must carry people." Traoré hadn't spoken a word since arriving. He simply stared at the earth. Then he knelt, head bowed. "I hope you heard me that day. I said what you taught me. I stood because you stood for me." The trees rustled. He felt the wind wrap around his shoulders like an old friend's arms. A single tear dropped onto the dry soil. Then, slowly, he stood, straighter than before. Because grief is not weakness, it's love in a different form. And before he left, he whispered, "They finally saw us, Papa." And for the first time in years, the grave felt less alone. Back in her hotel room, Karoline sat before her laptop, blank email screen open. To President Ibrahim Traoré. Subject, a request for conversation. But every time she typed a sentence, she deleted it. "I apologize for my words. Too weak. I didn't mean to offend. Too dishonest." The truth was she had meant what she said, at least before she knew better. The silence of her hotel room felt louder than the applause Traoré had received. She stood, paced, cried once, then sat again. Finally she wrote, "Mr. President, I now understand that words spoken from privilege can wound deeper than I knew. I'm not asking to debate. I'm asking to listen. If you'll allow me the dignity to learn what I once mocked. Sincerely, Karoline Leavitt." She hit send. Her hands trembled. Then she waited. She didn't expect a response. But 2 hours later, her screen blinked. "Tomorrow morning. Quiet breakfast. No cameras. Just 2 people. If you're willing." She covered her mouth, tears falling freely. Not because of shame. Because someone she tried to humiliate was offering her grace. And that changed her more than any political loss ever could. The cafe was small, a modest Burkina Faso-owned spot tucked into Geneva's quieter corner. Traoré arrived early. No guards, no suit. Just a plain shirt, a leather notebook, and a warm nod. Karoline walked in 15 minutes later. No makeup, no aid, no agenda. They didn't speak for several minutes, just the sound of a spoon stirring tea and the distant morning birds. Then Traoré said softly, "You look tired." "I haven't slept," she admitted. He smiled gently. "Neither have my people. For years." Silence again. Then Karoline leaned forward. How do you forgive so easily?" Traoré sipped his tea. "I don't. I remember. But I don't let memory become a prison. I let it build a bridge." She looked down. "I thought you'd reject me." He shook his head. "Dignity without fear means standing tall, even when someone tries to pull you down. But it also means lifting others when they're ready to rise." Karoline blinked fast. This wasn't a political education, it was a human one. And for the first time in her life, the cameras were gone, the lights were off, and she was finally learning what leadership truly looked like. They didn't pose, they didn't smile for cameras, but someone snapped it. A quiet photo from across the cafe. Traoré, mid-laugh. Karoline, eyes red, face soft, hands around a ceramic cup, like she was warming her soul. No press release followed, just a caption from a passing student. "When a man gives the world his pain and offers his hand anyway, that's power." The photo went viral in under 2 hours. But this time the comments weren't about politics. They were about healing. One man wrote, "As a Rwandan, I know this kind of moment is rare. When wounds meet wisdom, something shifts." A woman from Alabama shared, "I watched the clip with my kids. We cried. Then we talked. Real talk. This is what we need." Karoline didn't say anything publicly. She didn't need to. Because true change doesn't announce itself. It humbles itself. That night, across the globe, millions revisited Traoré's speech. Not to be outraged, not to debate, but to feel. And in Burkina Faso, an old woman lit a candle and whispered, "You have made us visible." The world was watching, but this time, with eyes wide open. The sun had barely risen when a video surfaced from Burkina Faso. No filters, no script. Just a circle of children in a village schoolyard, their clothes dusty, feet bare, faces glowing. They were reenacting the speech. One small boy, no older than 7, stood up and mimicked Traoré's voice. Mocking the struggles of others does not make you powerful. The others watched, then clapped with excitement. Then, a girl stood and spoke. "We may not have your wealth, but we have something you've lost." She paused, hand on heart, dignity without fear. The video was posted by a visiting French volunteer. By noon, it had 12 million views. Karoline watched it alone, knees drawn to her chest. She cried, not the quiet tears of shame, but the kind that come when you see yourself clearly for the first time. She opened her phone and tweeted, "Burkina Faso taught me what no textbook could. Forgiveness is power, truth is armor, and dignity is the loudest silence. No hashtags, no PR spin, just truth." And across the world, something shifted, because a child in the sand had just spoken louder than any world leader ever could. That evening, in Ouagadougou, a crowd gathered under the stars. Thousands stood outside a government building where Traoré was expected to speak, but he didn't take the stage. Instead, he walked down into the crowd. No podium, no microphone, just a single lantern in his hand. He raised it, then said, "I did not come here to lead you tonight. I came here to thank you for carrying this country when I could not, for believing when others mocked, for teaching the world what real pride looks like." Then he stepped aside and handed the lantern to an elderly woman, Mama Fata. She held it high, trembling. Tears poured down her cheeks. "I buried 3 sons, but tonight I feel them standing behind me." No music, no speeches, just thousands of people standing still, hands joined, hearts wide. Across oceans, millions watched. No subtitles needed, because this moment, this raw, wordless grace, could be felt. Not just by Burkinabe, but by anyone who had ever been silenced, forgotten, or mocked, and still stood tall. Traoré smiled quietly. The world had heard them now, not through war, but through wounds that chose to heal. Weeks later, Karoline returned to the US, not with a media tour, not with spin, but with books, African authors, village stories, old wisdom, and with a new bill in her hand, the Dignity Exchange Act, supporting grassroots initiatives in Africa designed by Africans. When asked who inspired it, she said only, "A man who didn't raise his voice, but raised a nation." Traoré returned home, planting trees in the same soil where his brother once played. No ceremony, just peace. And on the anniversary of the forum, a plaque was placed at the Geneva Hall. Here, silence taught the world something words never could. Underneath, Ibrahim Traoré, president, brother, voice of the unseen. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something real, if it opened your eyes or brought tears to them, please do one thing before you go. Comment the line that moved you most. Like this video to honor those who still fight with dignity, not noise. Share it so the world never forgets this moment. And if you believe the world needs more leaders like Traoré, subscribe. Because this is not just a story. It's a reminder of what we must never forget. Dignity, without fear, forever.